Well, welcome everybody to our Academy presentation. Today we're very pleased to have a panel of speakers, the Reverend Twinkle Marie Manning, Nils Pedersen, Kevin McCulloch, and Mark Reimers. I will be the moderator, and the topic is, what do we need from liberal religion in the 21st century? Kind of a provocative topic. I'm going to explain the format first. So we're going to start by giving everybody 5 minutes to do their presentation. And then after that, we have 2 prepared questions, and we'll do a round robin with the 2 prepared questions. Approximately 15 minutes after the hour, we'll open it to anybody. We just ask you to try and be brief so that as many people as possible can participate. Okay, so I'm going to start. The one thing I'm going to let you know is there will be a timer up so that the speaker knows when their time is up. So I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to start my timer. Okay, the timer is started. So I'm sorry, our first speaker is Reverend Twinkle Manning.
Hello, everyone. Our world is in crisis. There is a constant barrage of concerns globally, nationally, wars ensuing and brinks of wars constantly threatened. Our communities are stretched thin of resources. Many feel increasingly unsafe. Healthcare is out of reach for the majority, even in first world countries. Homelessness is out of control. Food insecurity touches almost everyone in one way or another. Sustainable living is a thing of the past. People struggle every day just to make ends meet. And our Earth, through her climate, is signaling us daily that time is running out to change how we treat her. Yes, our world is in crisis. Many days it feels like too much to bear. Yet, somehow, in a modern day miracle, an increasing number of people are making the decision on any given Sunday to muster the energy to come to our liberal religious congregations in person and online. Some, even many, for the first time, others returning after long absences. Whether stalwart or returning members or newcomers, each have packed up their hope and perhaps skepticism and brought it with them as they seek solace in a time that feels and is unprecedented to them. What they need and what they deserve as they seek to make sense of this world and as they seek a place and a people to belong to is radical welcome. Friendships in forms they recognize, hope in hopeless world, and their cup filled up with love and inspiration. Sundays is when most people meet us for the first time, when they are seeking a new church to call home. Through our worship services, we are wise to share our dream of a positive future, offering practical avenues in our daily routines to create peace in our hearts, calmness in our minds, and harmony in our relationships. While acknowledging the realities we live in, often even the horrors we are confronted with, it is important and necessary to do that. It is also vital for liberal religion to create a spiritual haven, one that begets the attributes of a chosen family, a place where, when we come together, it is sacred to share our joys and concerns with each other, more than just as a status update, but rather that builds a sense of knowing and tender concern for each other, as it leads to genuinely celebrating each other's triumphs and holding each other when grief greets us. When we are able to achieve relationships at this level, we find our congregations flourish beyond Sunday mornings. As people share what they are passionate about and eager to learn and grow together, they are eager to extend their compassion to others in the congregation and in our wider communities because their need for community has been met. What do we need from a liberal religion in the 21st century? Radical welcome, building relationships as chosen families, creating safe haven and spiritual solace. May that be so. Amen.
Thank you, Reverend Manning. And you can use the react button to thank her if you would like. Let me set the example. Okay. All right. So next on our list is Nils Pedersen. Nils, are you ready?
Sorry, yes, ready to go here.
Okay, I'm going to start your time.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks for inviting me here. I'm currently the board president of the Salish Sea Fellowship in Port Hadlock, Washington, which is essentially a breakaway group from Quimper Unitarian in Port Townsend. We've been going for about 2.5 years and have settled into a certain comfort level, I guess, with who we are and what we're up to. Ostensibly, we have over 70 members, but really about a core group of 45 or so, average Sunday attendance. We meet twice a month in person at a rented Methodist church. And when I looked at this question, my initial response was really, well, who is this we, Kimosabe? And I think the old Lone Ranger joke is on point. If you ask me personally, I came to UUism in the 90s while raising two daughters, working more than full time. Me and Joyce, I should say, both working. It became valuable to me to have that connection to our UU church because of two things. First, increasing community and friendships outside of work. And secondly, Sunday services were a pause in a hectic life where usually I would be intellectually stimulated and also reminded each Sunday of what really matters in life. And at the last second, I wanted to read you this quote, which I think says it well. Otherwise, our administrator found this today. Our religious communities, at their best, are places where we grow our capacities to be with experience in all its complexity and paradox, to listen deeply to one another, to allow ourselves to be seen and held in love, and to respond creatively and collectively. That's by Sherry Prudhomme. Now, at the Salish Sea, our average member is white, female, highly educated, upper middle to upper class, retired, and are in their mid to late 70s. That is less than 1% of the US population in that demographic. So when it comes to the Salish Sea, our little demographic seems to say what we want is 2 services a month, a variety of interesting speakers. We'd like it available on Zoom and recorded for later viewing, which we do. 3 services is apparently too much. We really want community and connection. That's what we do so far by having a monthly potluck, maybe an additional community gathering. A big emphasis on pastoral care. We have one precious volunteer who does such a great job reaching out to the community when anyone needs help. We also do covenant groups or lighthouse groups, essentially a form of small group ministry. And another big piece is, of course, adult education classes, which include both religious and other topics. We support local social programs, including our host church's outreach to the homeless and needy. What was interesting is also what we don't want, at least right now. We don't want more than 2 services a month. We don't want a paid minister. We don't want the huge expense, and we like the variety of speakers we have. And we don't want to build a new building because we like where we are. Now, a lot of this is perhaps predictable given our demographic. If I were building a fellowship to try and attract the other 99% plus of the population, well, offering a welcoming community, being really clear about who we are as a religion, definitely having something to offer beyond a sermon on Sundays, whether that's adult education, definitely pastoral care, definitely social justice programs, strong online and social media presence, childcare, daycare, ride share, looking for what your community needs that you can help provide. Definitely some larger project, something that will unite our church community around a task, something to do, something to build, somebody to help, depending on what that is. If the we we're talking about is the greater world, what it needs from liberal religion, I would say a voice of reason and tolerance on the issues of the day. And I just use up my time.
Thank you so much, Nils. Let's get the reaction button going here. All right. All right. Two very different viewpoints on what we need. Our third speaker is Kevin McCulloch. And are you ready, Kevin?
I am.
Okay, I'm going to start your timer. Okay, there you go.
All right. One of the dilemmas of a church that positions itself at the vanguard of change is that it's unclear what to do when the rest of society catches up. The early Unitarians and Universalists were radical when they took aim at Calvinist doctrines like total human depravity and predestination, but by the late 19th century, most mainline American churches had abandoned those ideas. In the 1980s, if you wanted to attend a church that affirmed gay and lesbian people, Unitarian Universalist churches were the only game in town. But today, every left-leaning Christian church has a rainbow flag out front. Modern Unitarian Universalists have generally responded to this dilemma by pushing their politics ever leftward. The problem with this approach is that the most radical positions on the left today are anti-liberal, in their dogmatism, in their anti-Semitism, and in their admiration for authoritarian regimes. After a certain point, it is impossible to be both radical in your politics and liberal in your attitudes. This is an especially big problem when you are living through an age of extremism. In America, the ideological purification of our political parties, the outsized influence of ideological pressure groups on both the left and the right, the sociological sorting of our population into separate red and blue enclaves, and the algorithmic nature of social media have all converged to amplify extreme voices at the expense of calm, considered, and tolerant ones. In UU churches, this drift towards extremism is manifest as a rejection of the liberal ideal of progress in favor of the more radical ideal of liberation. Now, there are times when liberation is the proper rhetorical framing, as with struggles for basic civil liberties or for national self-determination. But the liberation framing has one glaring downside, which is that it sees the whole world as a struggle between oppressors and the oppressed, between good people and bad. It turns everything into a zero-sum struggle, and it assigns moral worth to people based on their position in this struggle, rather than their character and intentions. Among our generally well-off and well-educated church membership, this makes for a shallow, anxious politics, as people fall over themselves trying to demonstrate that they are on the side of the oppressed. And it undercuts the pragmatic genius of democratic politics, which is the ability of people with different points of view to form coalitions to work on particular problems, like income inequality and the corrosive impact of technology that cut across ideological lines. The challenge for liberal religion in the 21st century is to recognize that, in an age of extremism, liberal religion's role should be to moderate rather than inflame our passions. In our zeal for justice, we have forgotten liberal habits of tolerance, of non-judgmental listening and learning from one another, and of non-dogmatism. But more fundamentally, we've forgotten the reason these habits are so important, which is that human societies are inherently complicated and messy, that knowledge is always contingent and always in need of revision, and that ideology is just as likely to distort our understanding of the world as to clarify it. Finally, I'd like us to remember that the proper focus of liberal religious inquiry is not the nature of God, but the nature of human beings. And I'd like to see liberal religious thinkers engage seriously with the modern fields of cognitive psychology and evolutionary anthropology. These fields help us to understand that human minds are not optimized for discerning abstract truths, but for navigating the human social world. The realization that we're all subject to the same cognitive biases should help to guard us against the moral certainty and righteous zealotry that is antithetical to the liberal attitude. Thanks.
Thank you, Kevin. Okay, I'm going to call on next our host, Mark Reimers. Are you ready, Mark?
I am ready.
Okay, your time is starting.
Great. Thank you, Sunil. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I suspect that mine may be the least popular of the four perspectives we hear tonight, because I think that liberal religion, as we have known it, is near death, and that the great job of the coming generation will be to reinvent liberal religion. And I propose that the way to do this is twofold: to both look back to the fount of liberal religion and to look ahead to the unfolding of scientific knowledge that bears on, or will bear on, the essential concerns of liberal religion. So I first want to review two aspects that all three of the previous speakers have mentioned that we really need from liberal religion. And the first is a long-standing function of religion is community. And that seems even more compelling right now as we live in an age that feels increasingly fragmented, atomized, and competitive. We need other people to share and give meaning to our life's struggles, our successes, and our losses. And we like to find common meaning and evoke shared feeling in rituals that we observe together. The second thing that I think we need is perhaps more recent, but has been a distinctive part of the Unitarian tradition since its founding, and that is openness to and interest in the broader truth, including, and perhaps especially, truths that impact our sacred beliefs. So we need people with whom we can share the pursuit of truth and debate what the truth really might be. And this seems to be increasingly pressing because we are overwhelmed with that tsunami of opinion, propaganda, and disinformation. So let's go back to the two words of the phrase liberal religion. The first is the word religion, or sorry, I should say the second is the word religion. And that was first used in the Roman Republic, a very multi-ethnic polyglot society. And the Romans used it to describe the rituals and practices that bind together people from a specific ethnic group, a specific corner of the world. The Romans didn't much care what you believed unless it had political implications. And although they were inured to cruelty of all sorts, they wouldn't understand burning someone at the stake for heresy or even canceling them. So our need for that kind of meaningful community, the shared binding rituals that pull us together, has not changed much in 2,000 years. But what has changed is our cultural landscape. In particular, the invention of the printing press and widespread literacy made information and opinion available to so many people, which caused huge political chaos in the 16th century. And now we are living through an explosion of opinion through social media and artificial intelligence. So one of the big questions remains, what is true? The original sense of the word liberty or liberality was generosity, and that's a sense that we still use today. The Romans thought that the freeborn person should be liberal with their wealth, but our sense of the word starts with Cicero, who tried to ennoble the concept of liberality by defining it as giving of yourself, giving of your personal skills and gifts to the broader society. This sense of liberalism was rediscovered in the late Middle Ages and became the backbone of the so-called liberal education, also a term that we continue to use today. Now, but 20th century liberalism was built on both the Enlightenment, but even more on the romantic reaction against the Enlightenment, exemplified in our tradition by the New England Transcendentalists. They claimed that we each had a spark of the divine and we could directly apprehend the divine truth. And that set us up to ignore the essentially social nature of reason, that reason is honed by discussion, by fair play. It's not given to us by revelation. And unfortunately, I think that that aspect of liberalism is what we have to give up in order to reinvent liberalism. So what might that look like? I think it means drawing on neuroscience and on anthropology to understand the frailty and fallibility of human thinking, as Kevin said, our propensity for politics that interferes with our rational selves. And that's not something that's built in, but something that rather we build up over many years. And that's what I think we need to focus on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, now we go to the second phase, which is I have a couple of prepared questions, and I will warn everybody ahead of time that I will cut the questions off at 5:15 because we want to give everybody else a chance to participate. So we're going to go through the same round robin as we did before, but we're going to change to a 2-minute timer. Let me just make sure I get that 2 minutes down. Okay. And let me read the first question. The first question is, as America has become more culturally liberal, why has liberal religion not taken a more prominent place in the religious landscape of America? Twinkle, would you like to go first?
It may be that liberal religion is not sure which lane it wants to be in. Perhaps even it has an identity crisis and wants to be both a religion and a secular organization. Regarding the latter, there are many, many choices people can turn to if their dominant desire is to organize for social justice. Whether it's direct action, seeking policy reform, participating in protests and education, many organizations that are much better funded and led by people who have time to do so. Rather than competing with that, I believe liberal religion would do well to focus primarily on fostering spiritual growth and building beloved community. And when called to, partner with secular organizations aligned with the congregation's vision and mission.
Thank you, Twinkle. Let's see, Nils, do you have a response? You're muted, Nils.
Here we go. Yep, got it. I don't have a great response because I think Twinkle said it a lot better probably than I can. I did think about the UUA's seeming attachment to social justice causes, which is fine, except I think when you toss out the tolerance and reason parts of the equation, cancel culture creates divisions, draws lines. I think we're seeing diminishes the canceller along with the canceled. I also think the sort of inherent amorphousness of liberal religion is difficult for many people to sort of look at. What's the there? And I think that gives them a little pause. And it also feels like maybe I think Kevin was going in this direction, that it's like liberal religion led the country during certain parts of our history, the US in any case, in certain ways of thinking, and the rest of the country perhaps caught up. And, what's our point now that we're all sort of on the same level is what's our cause? I think this is what the UUA has struggled with, as I think Kevin pointed out well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you,
Yep.
Nils.
Yep.
And everybody's doing a good job of keeping in their time limit. So Kevin, do you have a response?
Yeah, sure. I didn't really prepare a response, but I'll just kind of speak off the cuff. I grew up UU, and my whole life there's just sort of been this question, of like, why isn't everyone a UU, right? Back in the 90s, I don't know if you guys remember, there was something called BeliefNet, where you could take this little, like online survey. They would ask you questions about religion, and then they would give you like an answer of like it's like a DNA test, right? And there were all these people who were just Googling, 99% Unitarian Universalist. What on earth is that? Right? There's a sense in which, particularly the old principles and purposes are, they're very common attitudes, sort of in our society, and I think that that's sort of to our society's credit. The answer that I've always given is to sort of why our churches are not, therefore like massive, right? It's not a very popular answer, and I think it might sound insulting, and I don't mean it. I mean it kind of lovingly, but my answer to that is that we are a weird little thing of inherently limited appeal. I just sort of always sort of felt that way. That doesn't mean that we're unimportant, and I think that our influence kind of extends well beyond our numbers. I think sort of providing, the kind of the shelter that we provide for, for reflection and also creating community. And I really appreciate, Niels and Twinkle talking more about just sort of like what happens in church, in the mornings, because I didn't really talk about that at all. I think that that's really important. I don't know that we're ever again going to be massive, but I think, I'm sort of comfortable with us sort of continuing to try to be true to ourselves. I think that that's really what we need to do. And then just, I think our influence will just kind of take care of itself. We'll speak for itself.
Thank you, Kevin. I like the part about being true to ourselves. Okay, so Mark.
Great, thank you. So I think too many people conflate liberal with culturally liberal or left wing in the sense of the 1960s counterculture. And it's certainly true that America's become more culturally liberal in the sense of the 1960s lifestyle revolution. But America has not become, in fact, more left-wing in either the classic economic sense, which used to define left-wing, nor has it become more liberal in the intellectual sense. And I think that people who want to pursue those kinds of lifestyle change advocacy don't need a religious group, as several of you have pointed out. In fact, many of them don't even want the trappings of a religious group to advocate for lifestyle changes. So from my reading of the early history of Unitarianism or of Universalism, the early Unitarians and Universalists were primarily pursuing a spiritual journey. That journey often called them to be speaking out about issues like racial justice, and many of them did, some did not. But these were secondary outgrowths of their spiritual journey. But it seems to me that the Cultural Revolution of the 1960s and 70s made it almost radioactive to talk about, in a serious way, about what we are trying to do in a spiritual journey. How many people can use that phrase without embarrassment today? And I think during the 1960s and 70s, that spiritual journey was replaced by the very visible and very successful involvement in the civil rights movement. And I think many people want to keep that, think of that as our time of glory and want to recover that. But that time is not coming back. I think we need to rediscover our original mission as, as Twinkle said, place for, I'm sorry for forgetting how Twinkle said it, but very nicely. Okay, thanks all.
Thank you, Mark. And thank you, everybody, for being on time. So we do have a second question, and this one really concerns emotion versus reason. And the way I'm going to word it is as follows. Some political and religious leaders are skilled at exploiting people's feelings. In contrast, UUs have been faulted for living too much in our heads and not being wise about human emotions. How can we address this weakness while honoring our fourth principle, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning? Twinkle, you are up.
I believe this is a both and situation. When we have both spiritual and intellectual discipline, we minimize our risk of having our feelings or thoughts exploited. It's up to each individually to shore up our hearts and minds. While this can be done solo, it, as with most things, is more easily achieved and sustained when supported by community. Increasing intellectual discipline through approaches similar to academic study, more pointedly, test your hypothesis before jumping on any bandwagons. And to test it, you may need to change the channels of information gathering you're accustomed to. While enhancing spiritual discipline through devotion and practices, doing so will help you to trust your own intuition. Even for those who want to avoid anything that resembles a woo-woo practice, there are accessible avenues to spirituality, be it journaling or walking in nature. These help you clear the noise of bad actors. Do these regularly. Repeat.
Thank you, Twinkle. That was a great response. Let's see, Nils.
Thank you. Okay, I tend to think that people pick a church not because of its particular belief or its core doctrine, although it does play a part, obviously, but usually, much like kids picking out a college because they're looking for a community that feels good to them. They're not looking to be told what to believe or not believe, but are looking for a good group of like-minded, broadly, and interesting people to hang out with. So to me, from my perspective, job one is to somehow communicate to people that we care about them and that they're valued. If that's established, it makes having conversations about difficult issues or points of disagreement much easier. Two things. At my first UU church, River Road UU in Bethesda, Maryland, for a while we had two ministers. Our lead minister was mostly in his head. He would take on an issue and happily start diagramming on a flip chart to make his point during the sermon. The next Sunday, his assistant minister would be totally from the heart, all about emotions and feeling. And it was a fascinating and really spiritually sort of enlightening contrast. Secondly, I keep going back to the idea of a personal check-in in meetings. Go around and check in with everybody. How are they doing? How you feeling? And it just makes everybody feel, whatever group you're starting or discussion you're going to have, that they're there, people care about them, and now we can take on the harder work.
Thank you, Nils. Next up is Kevin.
Yeah, so my reaction to that question is, that old joke about, I resemble that remark. You know, we have our tradition kind of going all the way back to the Puritans. The one of the through lines, from like the 1630s all the way up to today, is that our tradition has always really prized education, right? Like the first thing the Puritans did was start a college to train their ministers, and which is Harvard, and we have always just historically been more or less America's church of educated opinion. And I'm always struck, the congregation that I attend here in Georgia, we have a service reflection, kind of after the service where people come and talk about, and everyone is just always talking about the books that they're reading. We're sort of a bookish people, right? And I think that, I think that that's fine. Most Unitarians are educated professionals, which is to say we're people who kind of like make a living off of the back of our education. So that brings with it just a certain set of values and a certain set of habits that, I think, are fine for a community to sort of center around. I think, in the future, there was an article in the Atlantic this month about the end of reading. Just that we're sort of moving away from a culture in which people really just kind of sit down and read big long books. And so I don't know, kind of how we are supposed to sort of position ourselves in the age of social media and populism to sort of, to talk in slogans and not in monographs, right? But I do think that there's just in the future going to need to be a community of people who still, read books and talk about them. And I think that that's something that I think that we do well and should continue to do, and not be sort of ashamed or bashful about doing. So.
Thank you, Kevin. And lastly, Mark.
Thank you. So, people, the research psychologists who study human development consistently find tremendous variation in people's sophistication about emotion, their ability to understand other people's feelings or their own. There's a whole buzz phrase called emotional intelligence, although nobody can really define it in a way that makes it amenable to research. But it's something that's real and important. And they consistently find that children who grow up in families that make a habit of discussing over the dinner table or at any odd time of day the reasons behind other people's actions, behind their neighbors' actions, behind grandma's actions, that talk about other people's motives and feelings, these children grow up to be a lot more emotionally literate and sophisticated as adults. And I think that that's something we're missing. And I would say most of us are not particularly sophisticated about human feeling, partly because it's not something that American culture talks much about. But I think especially in the last generation, it's become part of progressive ideology that there's an implicit ban on talking about what's behind other people's behavior, their feelings and motives. We're supposed to take whatever people say about themselves at face value. We're supposed to believe and affirm their truth. Skepticism about what people say is treated as a thought crime by many progressives. So I think if we're going to overcome this unsophisticated and very primitive a way of dealing with human feeling, we need to become more sophisticated. The first step is to allow such conversations and to encourage them. But the more important step is to encourage adult self-education about feeling. There's a lot that we could learn that's available to us as adults if we missed as children. And that's what I hope we'll get.
Hey, thank you, Mark. Thank you for all of our speakers. We're now going to take a short break for two reasons. One is so I can do a little bit of advertising about NAUA, and the other is to give you time to think about what you would like to say in response. Feel free when we come back to raise your hand, and we'll take people in the order that they raise their hand. So let me share my screen first. And then let me get my, can you see my presentation now? Okay.
Yep.
All right.
Yes.
So advertising first, money. Okay. NAUA is a member service organization. We do rely on your dues in order to operate. And so here I have a QR code that you can use, and also a link if you wish to pledge to the NAUA. The other thing I would like to advertise is our upcoming programs. On this Saturday at 10 a.m., we have Reverend Manning leading us on service, Sustaining Through Change. That will be our worship service. Our book club is next Thursday, July 23rd. We just heard how we need to do more reading. The book is Love Your Neighbor, How Psychology Can Enliven Faith and Transform Community. And the discussion will be led by Nancy Haldeman. And lastly, and I do need to highlight something here, our next academy is not going to be on a Tuesday night. It's going to be on a Saturday. That's because our speaker is not available on Tuesday, but we have a very special speaker, Dr. Corey Clark from the University of Pennsylvania, and she's done a lot of work about political bias, tribalism, and how it impacts a person's search for truth. I think very relevant based on today's topic. So we do hope that as many of you as possible can make this meeting. So thank you, and I will stop sharing.